Welcome to episode 29 of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU. I'm your host and fellow student, Michelle Nelson, and together we'll learn the basics of residential design and construction and demystify the building process so you can build your dream home with or without a general contractor. Blown-in insulation, also called loose-fill insulation, is made of fluffy fibers of cellulose, fiberglass, or mineral wool. It's blown into walls, attics, and floors with special equipment. One of the main advantages of blown-in insulation is that it fills in odd-shaped cavities, crevices, and gaps, and it eliminates cold spots. We'll be talking about each different type of blown-in insulation in a minute, but first, let's go over this week's pro term. It's a quick one this week. The pro term is convection. Convection is heat flow caused by air currents or circulating air, like in a convection oven. Insulation aims to greatly reduce convection. Convection heat loss in insulation is rare, but it can occur when there are large temperature differences above and below the insulation. Listen up in the mini lesson for what type of insulation can have problems with convective heat loss. All right, let's move on to today's mini lesson. We'll start by talking about loose-fill fiberglass insulation. Loose-fill fiberglass insulation, like fiberglass blanket insulation, is made predominantly of glass fibers. An insulation blower is used to install the chopped fiberglass into wall and ceiling cavities. Blown-in fiberglass has an R value ranging between 2.2 and 2.7 per inch. All right, pop quiz. Define R value. R value was our pro term in episode 27 called Insulation 101. Can you remember what R value is? Well, R value is the resistance to heat flow. The greater the R value, the more a material will resist heat loss and heat gain. And you can increase a wall's R value by increasing the thickness of the insulation. So, for each inch of blown-in fiberglass insulation, you're increasing the R value by 2.2 or more. Loose-fill fiberglass contains 35 to 60% recycled content. It resists moisture and mildew, and unlike fiberglass bats, it contains no formaldehyde. If you think blown-in fiberglass is the right choice for your home, you'll have to decide between standard blown-in insulation and a BYHYU system, which stands for blow-in blanket system. With standard blown-in insulation, the loose fibers are simply blown into wall and ceiling cavities, and they can leave some loose fibers floating in the home. Not a good thing, since loose-fill fiberglass can irritate skin and lungs just like blanket fiberglass can. The second option, the blow-in blanket system, is a system that contains the blown-in fiberglass fibers with membranes or netting. Not only do these netted cavities help contain the loose fibers, but they also provide increased R value when compared to standard blown-in fiberglass. BYHYUs have an R value of 4.2 per inch. This system must be installed by licensed, certified, and trained professionals. You can search for a certified professional in your area by going to bibs.com. That's BIBS.com. Although you DIYers are not allowed to put in blow-in blanket systems, you can install your own standard blown-in fiberglass. And then you can save up to 70% of professionally installed blown-in insulation. You can rent an insulation blower from your local home improvement store or your tool rental store. But you should definitely consider hiring a professional if your project is complicated or if you're not particularly handy. So far, loose-fill fiberglass sounds pretty good, right? Well, let me tell you about one of the main disadvantages. Even if properly installed, blown-in fiberglass insulation can lose up to 1/2 its R value at very cold temperatures, especially sub-zero temperatures. This is because it's so lightweight and fluffy that air can easily move into and through blown-in fiberglass, causing convective heat loss. That ability of air to easily move through fiberglass is why air filters are often made of fiberglass. Air movement is good for air filters, but not so good for insulation. You can combat that airflow problem by topping fiberglass blown-in insulation with fiberglass blanket insulation or a higher density loose-fill insulation. like cellulose. So let's talk about cellulose. Loose fill cellulose is effective at all temperatures, and it has an R value of 3.2 to 3.8 per inch. Remember that the standard loose fill fiberglass insulation has an R value of 2.2 to 2.7 per inch, and the bib system has an R value of 4.2 per inch. So the R value of cellulose falls between those two fiberglass options. Cellulose is the most commonly used blown-in insulation material. It's typically comprised of about 85% of recycled newspaper or cardboard, plus 15% of a fire retardant. One fire retardant chemical that's most often used is boric acid, and it has an additional benefit of repelling pests and rodents. Another advantage to cellulose is that it's a pretty good soundproofing material. Often cellulose is damp when installed, so it's important that the wall cavities not be closed before the insulation has completely dried. In contrast to the fluffy, lightweight nature of loose-fill fiberglass, cellulose is heavy. In fact, it's too heavy for many attic installations. If you want to use cellulose in ceilings, drywall must be at least 5/8 of an inch thick instead of the standard 1/2 inch thick drywall. And many experts recommend beefier traditional framing with studs 16 inches on center instead of advanced framing with studs every 24 inches. The thicker drywall and extra framing material help to ensure that the ceiling doesn't sag from the weight of the cellulose. Cellulose is packed tightly to resist airflow, but over time, it can settle almost 20%, reducing its R value. If an inexperienced or untrustworthy installer fails to install extra product to offset settling, the R value of the cellulose will be less than it should be. Fiberglass insulation can settle too, but not as much as cellulose. Like fiberglass, cellulose is sometimes installed in combination with a netting or membrane system. Your insulation subcontractor should follow manufacturer's instructions, which indicate the amount of material that should be installed for the desired R value. The amount of cellulose is measured by bag count per square foot. The initial thickness that should be installed is always greater than the settled thickness. Product labels should provide the initial installed thickness required to achieve the desired settled thickness. If you aren't going to have a home energy inspector check your insulation, you might want to perform a bag count and collect the empty bags at the end of installation to make sure that the appropriate amount of insulation has been installed. One downside to cellulose is that it's less water resistant than fiberglass or mineral wool. Cellulose dust is another small problem. The dust fibers are too large to lodge in your lungs, so it's not a health issue, but it is a bit of an annoyance. Finally, a quick word about loose-fill mineral wool. It's made of fibers of natural rock or minerals. It has an R value of 3.0 to 3.3 per inch. Like fiberglass, it can irritate the lungs and skin. But unlike fiberglass, mineral wool is resistant to airflow. Mineral wool is a good soundproofing material and it's non-combustible. It's usually slightly more expensive than fiberglass or cellulose, and it's not used as often. Like cellulose, it's heavy. So thicker drywall and traditional framing are recommended for ceiling installations. All right, let's go on to today's quiz. Question number 1. What type of insulation is made from recycled newspaper and cardboard? The answer is cellulose insulation. It's typically made of about 85% recycled newspaper or cardboard plus 15% of a fire retardant. Remember, the main disadvantage of cellulose is that it can settle over time, so extra cellulose must be initially installed to offset that settling. Question number 2. True or false? Thicker drywall is recommended if you want to install blown-in fiberglass in the ceiling. The answer is false. Loose-fill fiberglass is lightweight, so thicker drywall in the ceiling is unnecessary. Loose-fill cellulose or mineral wool insulation is too heavy for standard 1/2 inch drywall on the ceiling. If you want to use cellulose or mineral wool in the ceiling, ceiling drywall must be at least 5/8 of an inch thick, and traditional framing, which is beefier, is recommended over advanced framing. This will prevent the ceiling from sagging. Question number 3. What type of blown-in insulation can lose up to half its R value in very cold temperatures? The answer is blown-in fiberglass. Because it's lightweight and fluffy, air can easily move through the insulation and cause convective heat loss. Even properly installed blown-in fiberglass insulation can lose up to half its R value in very cold temperatures. To combat this problem, you can top the blown-in fiberglass with blanket insulation or cellulose insulation. Well, that's all I have for this week. If you like the show, you can subscribe to it so new episodes will automatically be downloaded to you. And you'll always be able to find us under the My Podcasts tab in iTunes. To subscribe, simply search BYHYU, BYHYU, select the show, and hit the subscribe tab. Please remember that the purpose of this podcast is simply to educate and inform. It's not a substitute for professional advice. The information that you hear is based only on the opinions, research, and experiences of my guests and myself. That information might be incomplete and it's subject to change, so it may not apply to your project. In addition, building codes and requirements vary from region to region, so always consult a professional about specific recommendations for your home. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll come back next week for another episode of Build Your House Yourself University by BYHYU.